So I'd like to now invite to the platform to join Ike for the panel session, starting with the Executive Chairman and Founder of Phillips Consulting Limited. Please welcome Mr. Foluso Phillips. We also have Partner and Chief Economist at PwC Nigeria, Dr. Andrew Nevin. I want to welcome back the Chairman of Afrinvest Securities Limited and also Founder of the Y Group Holdings, Fatumata Coker. Oh, there she is. All right. And we also have the Executive Chairman of Exelon Capital, Mr. Chamberlain Peterside, joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Tola Adeyemi, Partner at KPMG, also joining us in this session. So as I mentioned, at some point, Ike will be going to the audience and a microphone will be passed around, so you can also share your thoughts on this. So Ike, on that note, it's over to you. Hello?
Okay, thank you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to my presentation. I'd like to just make it a very quick intervention by the panel, and I want to focus on the last section of my presentation, which was the critical imperatives that we must adapt in order to pull back from the brink. Clearly, the presentation has underscored a lot of challenges in the economy, a lot of challenges that we see in the banking sector, and the human development indices we are suffering. So, using those three pie charts, what are the wrong things that we should stop doing? What are the right things that we should start doing? And what are the smart things that we should start doing on top of the right things? I'd like to sort of go around amongst the panelists. You can choose to just talk on one of them, or you can choose to share your thoughts on all three, or as you see. But because of brevity of time, and I'm mindful that we need to go, I'd like to give you just 5 minutes for the first intervention. Felicia, do you want to start?
Okay. I guess this is on. Yes. I want to start, just not to waste time, about, I saw something there about electronic voting. I want to talk about political governance. And it just occurred to me that we spend so much on INEC and all that goes with voting. You can see what's happened over the last 2 days. I just wanted to be that if we spend 10% of what we do spend currently trying to devise some kind of electronic voting mechanism, I think it will make a lot of difference. In fact, I would dare say that if we were going to electronic voting, I will venture into politics. Because, and I say this more from the point of view that people like me can't really compete with the politicians out there. And the reality hits the road on voting day. When on election day, you just realize that you just can't cope with it. But if a lot of people in this room know that they don't have to go and battle it out and could just pick up their phone and at 12 o'clock you can go and make and vote for the person of your choice, I think we might begin to change governance a bit. So I think that's the first thing about the electronic voting thing. The second thing is, and I think it's happening, to try and concentrate a lot more on what I call subnational government. We tend to think too much about the national, Nigeria. Nigeria is made up of about 36 states and one federal, one capital territory. And we have to start evaluating and doing things on a state-by-state basis. You know, people have asked me, you know, in my own travels, hey, what about the GDP of Nigeria and this? And I say, which state are you talking about? Unemployment, which state are you talking about? Growth, which state are you talking about? Because it varies. So I think concentrating a lot more on this subnational is something that's very important. What has come up a lot more today has been the cost of governance, especially even our civil service. And I remember about maybe 12, maybe for longer years ago, Economic Summit. We had summit and we had the president of Botswana. He came round and he was like the guest, the main speaker. And he said something very interesting that I wondered, and I hope maybe Professor Charles Foluso could help us here. He decided that the state, the civil service, that is the government itself, would only spend as much revenue as it gets from the economy. All the income they got from diamonds and golds, for which they do have a lot of that, he said he would devote to education, to infrastructure and health. But if the government wants to pay itself, it's got to generate it from having an economically viable environment. So that is to say, income you get from taxes and customs and those things, that's all you're going to get to run government. And that way, government cannot be larger than the economy it's serving. And I think it would be interesting if we can sort of take a look at that, because our governance structure is way above the economy that we have currently. So I think that's something that would be a nice, bold move. With the banking sector, mine is more of a near emotional plea, just that we wish the banks would just have a much stronger developmental orientation in the kind of decisions they take. If I want to be naughty, I'll say the banks are very good at spending other people's money, but that would be very unfair of me. But the point is, the banks need to do a lot more from a developmental point of view. We talk about SMEs, about entrepreneurship, and all those things. But you and I know we can't do this at 25% interest rates. So all these things really need to be revisited, and I think they also can reduce their cost structure. Finally,
your time is up.
Okay, my time is up. We'll come back later on then. Okay. Yeah.
Fatumata, can I ask you to come in?
Okay. This one. I'm actually going to focus on the IT side and education because of the major population we have with the youth. I think what the government is doing wrong, or what we're doing wrong, is not really understanding what digital economy is and what the impact and influence it could bring to our future. So I would think that rather than just thinking about education and IT as a cut and paste situation, we need to really think about it in our context. What does it mean? I remember reading years ago about Singapore and other countries at that time that were developing, and they really took a step back and to understand the end product they wanted to put out. And it was the people. What does a Singaporean look like? What contribution does he or she bring into the economy? How do we now educate that person to be able to fully meet his or her potential? I think in Africa, we just educate just because, go to school. Your mom saying, your dad saying, go to school. You go, you either become an engineer, doctor, lawyer, you just got to have a kind of profession. But why are we doing these things? I think we need to really understand that. I get wary when we put numbers up, talking about education. The country is only contributing 7%, for example, Nigeria, compared to South Africa that is doing almost 30% of the GDP. But look at South Africa. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference in the percentage that you're putting into education if you're educating wrong, if you don't understand why you're educating. So I think for me, that's something that we do wrong. And then also in technology, we're adopting the same concept. We're taking technology because everybody says we should do technology. I mean, look at our banks. Yes, they're doing well, but are they really banking? Are they really giving us the solutions that we need? The technology that they're investing in, are those technology delivering the kind of services that we as consumers are looking for? And I think the answer is no.
Are you done?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Tola, okay, give us your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. Permit me to be a bit contrarian, but over this last weekend, I was discussing again with a group of friends about Nigeria, and as is usual in these discussions, you go all around with this sigh, and you shrug, and you say, we'll get there. And I say, no, we're not going to get there by being cynical. So if you ask me what we need to stop, I would say is stop being so cynical about Nigeria. We've got to rechannel our cynicism into action. This is about each of us looking at what are we going to do differently? What are we going to do to change the course of this country. In all my years in the corporate world, I've never seen a corporate transformation that's been driven on the back of cynicism. And you know it. We're all running organizations. None of us has achieved any change with being so cynical. So it's about rechanneling cynicism into action. Now, what are some of the actions? To my mind, there's some low-hanging fruits that we've all got to get together and, in a sense, push government towards. So I look at the oil sector and I say to myself, let's look at the joint ventures that we have within the oil sector. So currently we have these unincorporated joint ventures and which government is paying cash calls. We've been talking a lot about it. Let's incorporate the joint ventures so that they're standalone entities that can raise finance on their own. They stop being a drain on government resources. They start running a lot more efficiently. The multinational companies get a lot more confident. They put more money into these entities. Hopefully, we produce more oil, and at the end of it all, government gets more tax revenues. I think, this is my first contribution.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much. Chamberlain, you want to chip in?
Thank you, Ike. I'll look at that question from three perspectives. Number one is, what can the government do? What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? Government at the center, government in the states, and then what can the private sector do? What are they doing wrong or right? Things that are going wrong are quite obvious. I mean, we've been in this. You attend events and economic summit. You hear quite a lot about, the cost of governance being high, the cost of business being high, so much being spent on operating expenditure and too little into capital expenditure that goes back into society. And of course, the most critical aspect is the foundation on which Nigeria is sitting is quite weak. Professor Foluso, in one of his recent presentations, actually made a very, very good point that you're building a skyscraper on the foundation of a bungalow. It's just not going to work. However, if you look at the states, what they are doing wrong, I think the point is there's too much emphasis on the national government. So assuming we're not going to get reform, radical reform that the way we want it, devolution of power, cutting down civil service, what can we do with what we have today to achieve better results? For instance, being in public service, I thought that one of the critical things to do was to say to the states, your own reform agenda, what is it? I mean, Ike, you work in public service right now. We try to reform the tax collection system. We try to, set up automation to integrate payroll, pension, those very basic things that I think you don't need a constitutional reform to achieve. It's not happening. Investment in education, you don't need so much to galvanize, young people into gaining skill sets and different crafts. So the things that we're doing wrong is obvious. The things that we should do right is still debatable. But most importantly, on a final note, I think that we are not taking advantage of our youths, which is the large part of the population, and as well as technology. The regulatory framework for technology, I mean, if you want to set up a company, we are in the fintech space. It is too burdensome. I mean, try to get a mobile money license and all that stuff. It is extremely expensive, very burdensome. So you're not going to get the kind of shift, fast-paced growth that you expect, even with the kind of economic foundation or social foundation or political foundation that we have today. Mm-hmm. That's my piece.
Okay. Lastly, Andrew, your thoughts.
Thank you so much. Delight to be here. Thank you, Ike, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I guess, you've heard so much. I'm not sure what I have to add, but let me start out by saying that the entire state spending of all three levels of government in Nigeria is about 14 trillion naira. The economy is 140 trillion naira. You take out the interest payments, it's 12 trillion naira. And by my calculations, that's about 60,000 naira per Nigerian. Now, it's impossible to deliver public education, basic health care, infrastructure, power, security on 60,000 naira per Nigerian. So the result of that, of course, is Nigerians are very intelligent, and we've coined the term self-organized. They supply their own power, their own education, their own health care, their own security, their own infrastructure. And in fact, I'm not sure people are aware of this, 85% of school children in Lagos are educated in private schools. So not only are you all sending your children to private schools, but your driver and your maid is sending to private schools. So I would then say to the federal government, the number one challenge for the federal government is to be relevant to the people, because right now they're not relevant. In fact, they are relevant, but they're relevant in a negative sense. So how many of you would be happy if you got stopped by the Nigerian police, if you had to go see the customs, if you had to go see the FIRS? And I think that's an enormous challenge. I think a second point that's clear we coined the term is poor and poor, and eventually UWI told me to stop saying that, Andrew, because everyone knows that now. So we know we're getting poorer and poorer. The question is, how do we not get poorer and poorer? Well, mathematically, we need to have investment in the country that's about double the current rate of investment. So we have a world, we have $20 trillion, euros in negative interest assets, and people in Nigeria and people abroad are refusing to invest in the country with the greatest economic potential on the planet. Why are they not investing it? And I think that's the second issue the federal government needs to ask itself is, my wonderful friend Yolanda keeps going out, NIPC, people are not investing in Nigeria. And if I had to put, I think I'm with Foluso Chamberlain on this. Our view again is decentralization. States need to get on with what they need to do. Only they can solve the problem. People here, everyone here in the private sector is aware it's basically impossible to build a national program short of 10 to 15 years. So anything you announce as a program is not going to work, and progress is only going to happen at the subnational level. And finally, what is striking, I hope there's not too much press here, I don't want to get deported or fired tomorrow, but what's striking about the last few years, I won't name how many years, is how there has not been, as far as I can tell at the federal government, a single structural change. So you have the enormous effort of people at PEBEC, and they say we have a single window, so instead of dealing with 29 MDAs, you can deal with us. And the question is, why are there 29 MDAs? Unless there's some structural decisions that are made, we're not going to progress. And then the final comment I'll make is, so we all understand the blockages. The fundamental meta question for me is, what is the coalition that is going to put enough pressure on the system to change it? So between the organized private sector, the NGO sector, the young people of Nigeria, the state governors that are thinking in the right way, how does that coalition come together and affect change? And unless we figure that out, I don't see a bright future, but I'm optimistic. Thank you very much. God bless Nigeria.
Okay. I think that's with Joe. Can I ask, does anyone want to make another contribution based on what you've heard each of your respective panelists before I go to the audience for their comments or questions? You want to?
Well, I think. Yeah, I think that, I know we flogged education a lot, but I think we need to keep going back to education because it's easy to deal with those things that affect us right now, and it's easy not to deal with things that are going to affect us in the future. And because it's not having the direct impact, we can always postpone. If we don't start fixing education, which we're already screaming is getting at us, in another 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to be in serious trouble. We talk about having assets in this country. We talk about our oil reserves and our gas and gold and minerals, and we talk about our people. And what has been traditional for Nigeria is that we just consistently failed to beneficiate the assets that we have. So we don't beneficiate our oil, we don't do our gold, we don't do our gas, not to the extent that exists, and our people. We don't beneficiate our people, we don't add value to them. And yet our people, because of our huge population, it's a huge international resource. if we had phenomenally educated Nigerians, I would have no hesitation in sending them out to the whole world like India has done and China is doing. They say that, we say statistically that the revenues we generate from home remittances is a lot more from our oil revenue. So we really must try and see how we can create phenomenal value in our people who we can send out. Because, you know, when I say forget about Nigeria, by the time you're sending them out and they're smart, you know, you've already saturated this particular environment. So let's focus on education, education, education. That's mine.
I just wanted to add the third leg of the stool. I mentioned the federal government, the state, and the private sector. There is a massive underinvestment right now going on. We've seen how foreign direct investment is, you know, tapering off. But at the same time, you're not seeing, you know, the growth in domestic direct investment. You're only seeing private sector trying to survive. And I can imagine that central bank recognizes that and has tried to, you know, put some stimuli in that regard with all the intervention funds. But check carefully, the sector that had done pretty well, whether it's the media, the fintech, they don't have any intervention funds. In fact, the less regulated those sectors are, the better they have done. So can we, you know, get some traction in terms of federal government or the state governments taking a back seat, doing what they ought to do to let these sectors drive? And quite fortunately, that's where you have the most interest among the youths and the younger generation. So I think it's very important to have that.
Okay, thank you. You've heard it from the panelists. Let me just recap. Foluso talked a little bit about, you know, e-voting and what we can do in terms of using technology to do our elections. And if we could do that, he could run for governor, would you say? And also hinted on the issue of cost of governance and using the example of Botswana, you know, bringing down the cost of governance so they don't spend anything more than what they've made in terms of tax and receipts and not oil proceeds or mineral sales. And of course, banks to do much more from a developmental point of view. Fatumata focused more again on education and technology and also making sure that the education is in the right direction, not just that we do it because of, you know. And Tola, I think you made a very strong point about us stop being cynical, because cynicism is not going to get us out of our problem. And of course, the very eloquent point on the joint ventures, how we can incorporate them and use, and that's something that we can start doing right today. Right now, yeah. Chamberlain, you made quite a lot of points, and maybe too much emphasis on the central government, and that we should focus more on the subnationals and what they can do in terms of basic areas of tax collection, automation, investment in education. It's actually a very interesting point. I'm from the Enugu State, and I chair the Anambra State Investment Promotion and Protection Agency. And clearly, Anambra State has more commercial activity than Enugu State, but it collects about half of the tax revenue. So it just doesn't add up. And clearly, there's a lot of work that they certainly can do. And we need to take more advantage of our youth. Andrew, you really went all over the system. I think I can't recap you as efficiently, but there's the issue on decentralization and also focusing on the sort of longer-term planning. And lastly, what is coalition that we can put in place that can put enough pressure? Well, we have the Economic Advisory Committee. Maybe that can form a coalition to make a change. And last but not the least, Tola, I think I've kind of gone around. Yes. Okay, that's about it. You want to make another contribution?
Well, I wanted to make a quick point about agriculture.
Okay.
Because I think we're underestimating the problem that we have in agriculture. Okay. So currently, we have this population of 200 million people. We spend, well, I think the figure is about $36 billion or so importing food. Within this population, there's still a lot of malnutrition that's happening. There's still hunger in Nigeria, despite what we may think in Lagos. So when we look at the problem of agriculture, we've got to look into the future and say to ourselves, so for instance, by 2050, when we're 400 million people, will we be able to feed our population with the current practices that we have? I don't think we'll be able to do that. So I think if we don't do something radical in agriculture, we're heading for a crisis. Now, we see a lot of attempts at intervention and things like that, but it's scratching the surface. We have big issues we need to address in terms of the cost of inputs, in terms of post-harvest management, in terms of access to finance, even in terms of involvement of the youth and women in agriculture and increasing yields. So I just wanted to flag that as we talk about education, very important, let's not forget that we've got to feed the people as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to go to the audience and get some comments or feedback based on the presentation and what you've heard from the panel.
Right,
and we'll take 3 questions now.
Please, can we turn up? All right, so we're going to the audience now, and if you do have a question or comments, please raise your hand and let us know who you are directing your comment or question to. Please keep it very brief so we can get more people to chime in. Ike, you would direct, please.
Yeah,
should I start from here?
Okay.
Sorry.
Please keep it brief. Quick introduction and just get to the point.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Rabiolo. I'm Commissioner for Finance in Lagos, and it's my pleasure to represent Mr. Governor at this event. So a very quick one. I think for me sitting here, it's been very, very exciting, getting some of these insights and feedback from the panelists, as you've spoken. I think there's been much more argument for what the national government should do. But I think my perspective is a little bit different. I see, a huge opportunity in what states can do to be more responsible. Okay. So I see a lot more opportunity in what the states can do to be much more responsible. Governors should see themselves as chief executive. They should make money for their states. There's a whole lot of opportunity. I tell you, and I give you some example, it's a public information in terms of what, what the trend has been for Lagos. About 18 years ago or 15 years ago, we are a 400 million internally generated revenue state. Today it's about 500 billion. And we're not just sitting and saying, it's cool. If we say we are a 30 trillion naira economy, the potential for IGR today in terms of tax revenue, it's about 1.2 or 1.5 billion. So we're not just going to sit back and say, 500 billion, that we're doing well. There's a huge opportunity for even much more tax revenue we can get given the size of our economy in Lagos today. So other states need to also look at the opportunities that they can get from the formal and informal sector to generate, tax revenue, to welcome, foreign investment, to stimulate the economy to, towards better economic activity. And you gave a very, example of what your state, could do to even get much more, stimulation in the economy. I'll just touch very quickly as well on some of the 3 imperatives that you talked about, things that we should stop doing, things we should start doing, and smart things also that we should start doing. I think the most common part of what came out from the survey in terms of what we should stop doing is corruption. So corruption or cost of governance, and all those kind of related forms are things that are true, and with time, with awareness and people, citizens' participation, we need to question this status quo and ensure that these things are a forgotten issue. I will also talk about what Lagos is doing in terms of things that we should start doing. People talked about investment in education, investment in health. If you take time to study the 2020 budget that was just submitted to the House of Assembly, education is getting 60% more than it got last year. And that's to tell, just to align with this forum that education is really, really, really important, and is something that every state should actually focus on. So I think that's my, contribution.
Good point. Thank you. Any other comment?
We had someone on that side.
Someone on that side, yes.
The gentleman here, because he raised his hand first, actually.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm Dr. Matthew Ojo. I represent the Director General of LCCI, Mr. Moda Yusuf. I want to take it up from where Tola stopped in terms of agriculture. I think there's a problem with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. The focus of the government has always been on producing. But you see, research has shown that we lose up to 30% of what we are producing. It then means that post-harvest losses has to be addressed for us to attain food security in Nigeria. But see the way we transport food commodities in this country. There doesn't seem to be any policy that addresses commodity handling or transportation. You need to see how they transport tomatoes from the north. They transport it on fuel tankers these days. Yeah. And we keep on producing, and what we produce we lose, or they get wasted. So I think there needs to be a coordinated effort first to try and reduce what we lose when we produce. And then we can now start addressing the other issues. Okay, there's a common adage in Yoruba that when you take food issues out of poverty, poverty is almost half solved. Yeah. So we need to stop making this noise about access to credit. Fine, what are we doing? And that also provides a huge opportunity for investment. You see how plantain is transported, see how tomatoes, see even vegetables. The way they are transported in this country is baffling, and yet we have a Federal Ministry of Agriculture. So I think we need to look at that. So maybe that can help us in a bit to retain what we produce and solve our food issues. Thank you.
The center table? Okay. Yeah, there.
I'm Dr. Chidi Ulelu, ST Greyston Limited. I do agriculture, I company do agriculture. I only have one thing I think we should stop doing, and one that we can start doing. When disposable income of almost 90% of the people go into food, it's a very serious way of looking at it. I want to say it this way so they can capture it very well. Let us stop growing this audio rice.
What is that? Say that again?
Audio rice, growing audio rice. I should be very happy, that, because of the sector where I'm practicing. But the truth is that when we are trying to move minimum wage to 30,000 naira, and the price of one bag of the staple costs 20,500, it's not sustainable. So the reason is that we don't really have it the way we claim we do. If we had it that way, 3 days ago, this same product was moved to a country, Namibia, from Thailand at 6,500 naira a bag. It comes to Cotonou at 7,000 naira. Close all the borders, including the one in the sky. People will want to bring it in. So we should stop growing the audio rice. It is not actually there. What can we start doing? What can we start doing? Okay. What we can start doing immediately, clear and stump 50,000 hectares of land in every state and irrigate it. 1.8 million hectares of land. You can now get actual, not audio, 3.6 million young men. And they will farm on this place as if they make 5 to 6 tons per hectare. It will be 120 bags of rice on each hectare, sold at 8,000 naira a bag. And then we can get to where we want to get to. Thank you.
Can I stay on this table?
I know there's a lady at the back. I'd like to give a woman a chance.
If you don't mind, I would. Yeah?
Okay. That's a good one. Good afternoon. My name is Chioma Okibo, and I represent Mode Management Company Limited. I have a few comments. The first one is around what we really should stop doing. I think that the quota system is not helping us in Nigeria because we have talent. This country has a lot of very smart people. This gentleman that just spoke now told us simply how to grow more rice and stop growing audio rice. And I think that if we focus on merit, on actually putting the right, pegs in the right holes, we will get to where we want to get to. The quota system is actually a killer in our society as far as I can see. And the second thing is, I don't know how and why the states think that they cannot be creative in generating revenue without thinking about taxation, increasing taxation or whatever. I think that they have to find ways to generate activity within their states, activities that will generate revenue for the states beyond taxation. There are many examples, or a few examples, that show us that it is possible to do this thing. I'm not sure about the structure of the Nigerian state. I think that there is too much dependence or centralization in the federal government. So a little bit more power to the states to be able to define their own ways of doing business in each state that allows you to bring in the technical knowledge or skills or whatever, or the partnerships that you want to have without necessarily depending on the federal government for visas, for things like that into the country. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have someone in the center there.
We also have someone at the back.
At the back, sorry.
I'll go back later.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chief Don Eze. I'm CEO Donny Anderson Consulting. I just want to ask this audience, especially because we are talking about banking, why are we not able to have single-digit interest rates? Who are these banks making these profits for? Why when you lend money to me at 20-25%, I should be able to do 50% so that we can at least share it, 25 to you, 25 to me. But how many businesses give you 50% return? It's only Kalo you can do and get 50%. A normal standard business, especially if you go into manufacturing, you can't be expecting 50% return. So what exactly are we talking about? We need to go back from CBN to the banks. You must ask yourself, what sense are we making in this economy? Are you growing the medium and micro enterprises? You are not. When they get money at that kind of rate, until we get back to a single interest rate economy, every other effort we are making, I don't think this economy can ever grow. We are deceiving ourselves. Every year you publish big figures. This bank is making billion. This one is making. They are competing on billions made. They are competing on jets that they are buying, but they are not competing on how many SMEs did you produce and what's the quantum of money they are channeling to those people. No, we are not competing on those. So how can the economy grow? We are just doing paperwork and doing a Kalo economy. It doesn't really help. And even still talking about banking, we must also look at even what is happening. The bankers are not even well paid. You take a graduate person and you pay him 80,000 naira a month. What the hell is that? And he's looking after millions. There's something very wrong with our banking sector. You need to go back and ask yourself the moral questions about what you are doing, about the leadership you are providing, and ask yourself what happens in these other economies. We should be able to find out what happens in the growing economies and do exactly what they are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Ike, you will allocate that question?
Yes, there's a...
Really want to appeal to those asking questions to be brief, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nike Adeshokon. I'm the Managing Director of Travel Right Limited, travel and tours company in Nigeria, in Lagos. And I've had a very interesting afternoon. I've had everybody talk about different sectors, but no one has said anything about tourism, either on the national or sub-national level. Tourism is seriously underdeveloped in Nigeria. I just attended an exhibition in London last week called the World Travel Market. And I visited different stands, from different countries. Europe was there, it was, quiet. But when I went to the Africa department, it was bustling. There were many people there wanting to go to Africa, obviously because of our tropical weather all year round. But what's been done in Nigeria? We have virtually in every state of Nigeria something that somebody can visit, somewhere that somebody can come and have a look at. But none of this is developed, and we're losing money. You need to go to Dubai. They're making money daily from tourism. So I think that we should also look at tourism, state level, national level, however, so that we can also have some income from that channel. Thank you.
Thank you. Good contribution. There's a lady here.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Hilda Oko. I'm with the Society for Corporate Governance, Nigeria. I was a panelist at a conference not too long ago, and the first thing I said when I came up to speak was the fact that we keep having this kind of gatherings every time. In 1 year, if you're a corporate person, you will attend at least 4 or 5 of this kind of gatherings. And we talk, we analyze, we come up with great ideas until we paralyze the situation. So, 2 things I'm going to say here this afternoon. Top on the list being the fact that the matter of governance in this country, both at the private and at the public sector level, we should revisit it again on a more serious note, and that in a more serious way, and that is by asking relevant questions to relevant people. For instance, in your community, on your street, are you asking the chairman of your landlord association or residents association, relevant questions as it affects the governance on your street? I can assure you that 80% of those of us sitting in this room do not even know who our local government chairmen are. Even where we are living right now, I'm not talking about the village. That's one. And then the brain drain is serious. Our doctors, our young ones are just very keen on, let me graduate and get out of this country. What is being done to keep the bright brains behind here in Nigeria to help develop the nation? Thank you.
We have one question in the front, I believe. If we can just take this one, please.
Okay. Yes.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Benjamin Obidogu, Managing Partner, Hemon. We've done all the analysis here, and it's always been laying it down, government ought to have done this, government ought to have done this. When you were asking what we were supposed to do, what the government ought to do differently, I stated, how do we get the right people and committed people into government? And it's not Mr. Foluso Phillips has been chairman of Nigerian Economic Summit Group. You come together every year, talk, send things to government and all that. What happens? Nothing. So until we get people into government, what that means simply that government has failed us. So but how do we get the right people into government? So that when these things are said and proposals are sent and all that, they will be able to implement it. If we don't, then it's still the same thing all over again. Every year we sit down and talk and all that. Professor Sosorido is there, he's heading a member of the Economic Advisory Council. They advise the government. Will they listen? I hope they do. If they don't, then I'm sorry. We'll sit down every year and just keep saying the same thing. And it is important, like Hilda said and all that a lot of us should show more than personal interest in politics and in government. If we talk and we go away and all that, then it's still the same thing all over again every year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think on that note, we'd like to close the panel discussions. I'd like to thank all my fellow panelists.